Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine these huge, sort of untouched places on Earth, places we think we know, but, they're still holding these deep secrets about our history, millions of years back. Today, we're diving into one of those, the Bayuda Desert in Sudan. It's been this vast, mysterious zone for ages, right by that big bend in the Nile, mostly, well, overlooked by archaeologists.
Exactly. I mean, the Nile Valley itself, extensively studied, but this huge desert, over 140,000 square kilometers.
Yeah.
It's really been one of the least explored bits of Sudan.
Right.
Now, there was some important earlier work, back in the mid-20th century, people like Chittick, Mallinson, and Smith, Meinhold.
Yeah.
That's it, initial surveys.
Okay.
But really systematic, large-scale work in the desert proper. That only really picked up steam this century. Researchers like Kendall, Carberg, and Lowasser, Paner.
And the fuel for our deep dive today is just, well, it's pretty remarkable stuff. We're digging into the findings from this massive 6-year research mission.
Yeah.
It was run by Polish archaeologists, University of Wrocław, the Polish Center of Mediterranean Archaeology in Warsaw, and the Gdańsk Archaeological Museum. And their discoveries, just published in Antiquity.
And it's a project on a scale that's really unprecedented for the Bayuda.
Mm-hmm.
Their team used intensive aerial reconnaissance, looking from above,
Mm-hmm.
and then combined that with really systematic ground surveys. They focused their field work on about 30,000 square kilometers within that larger desert area.
Okay, so our mission here, for you listening, is to basically sift through all of this incredible new information. We want to pull out the absolute key takeaways, the things that just, flip our understanding of who was in the Bayuda and when. We're talking millions of years of history here.
Right. So first things first, where exactly is the Bayuda? We're talking central Sudan, defined by that big westward curve of the Nile.
Got it.
It's a tough environment now, obviously, very arid. But as we'll see, it wasn't always like that.
And I think one of the first really big takeaways is just the sheer amount of stuff they found, the scale.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Across the whole area they surveyed, they documented something like over 1,200 ancient sites total.
Wow.
But the main project, the one focused on prehistoric communities in the Kerma Kingdom's reach, they formally documented 574 sites. Now, here's the kicker. Out of those 574, 448 were completely new. Never recorded before.
Hold on. 448 new sites in a place we sort of pictured as mostly empty.
Yep.
That number, that alone is just a huge insight. It completely changes the map, doesn't it?
It really does. It tells you that human activity there was way more extensive, way more persistent than we previously assumed.
So how did they find them all?
Well, it was a combination. That aerial reconnaissance first, spotting things from the air, then huge ground surveys, actually walking the landscape.
Right, boots on the ground.
And then, based on that, targeted excavations. They dug at 88 of the documented sites. That included 36 cemeteries and 55 settlements.
Yeah.
And they excavated, in total, 84 graves.
And the dating. That's crucial for piecing this timeline together. They went deep on that, right?
Oh, yeah. They got 114 radiocarbon dates so far. That covers a huge span from the Mesolithic, like 8,000 years ago, right up to post-medieval times.
Okay.
And for the really old stuff, the Paleolithic sites, they used other methods. OSLR RSL dating. That lets you date when minerals were last exposed to sunlight or heat.
So you can go way beyond carbon dating limits.
Exactly. Hundreds of thousands, even millions of years back.
And they used modern tech, too, didn't they? Like 3D modeling?
Definitely. Lots of 3D photogrammetry creates these incredibly detailed digital models of the digs, the artifacts, and GIS, Geographic Information Systems. That's key for mapping everything, for analyzing how sites relate to each other and the landscape. If you look at their publication, the figures, you can see just how detailed it is. Really powerful for analysis.
Okay, so that sets the scene. Huge area, tons of new sites, solid dating, high-tech recording. Let's dive into the timeline. Start way back. The deep past. Paleolithic. Potentially millions of years ago. What did they find from that ancient time?
Well, they pushed the timeline for human presence way back. They found sites with Old Awan stone tools.
Old Awan, the very first ones.
Yeah, but the earliest known tool industry. Simple choppers, flakes. We're talking 2.6 to maybe 1.7 million years ago, found in the northwest and southeast parts of the desert.
Wow. Millions of years ago. People making basic tools out there.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then moving forward a bit in time, they also found lots of evidence for the Acheulean. That's roughly, say, 3.3 million down to about 300,000 years ago.
And Acheulean is the hand axes.
That's the classic tool, yeah. Those big, well-made bifacial hand axes, plus other flake tools. They found these, and crucially, at one site in the southeast, BP 2048, they found what looks like an Acheulean workshop.
A workshop, so making tools on site.
Exactly. People weren't just passing through. They were stopping, maybe for a while, and actually manufacturing their tools right there.
Okay, now, the Middle Stone Age, this is, what, 300,000 down to maybe 50,000 years ago? You said this is where it gets really interesting.
This is where they found clear evidence of the Levallois technique.
Levallois. Explain that again. Why is it such a big deal?
It's not just chipping away randomly. It's a sophisticated method.
Huh.
You have to carefully prepare the stone core first, shape it in a specific way, all so you can strike off one single, perfectly formed flake or point that you planned in advance. It shows real foresight, abstract thinking. Professor Paner, one of the project leads, described it as needing many intermediate steps. It's complex.
And finding Levallois here in the Bayuda, what does that signify?
Well, it's a technology that's really strongly linked with the emergence and spread of early Homo sapiens across Africa. So finding clear Levallois evidence in the Bayuda strongly suggests our species, early Homo sapiens, were present in this region. At a pretty early date, they found it at sites like BP 1316 and 1317.
And was there one site that really stood out for this period?
Yes, definitely. Site BP 177. It's known locally as Goat Mountain, and it's stratified.
Stratified, like layers of history.
Exactly, like a cake. Different layers representing different times people were there. And at Goat Mountain, they dug up over 60,000 stone artifacts. Just incredible density.
60,000, wow.
And within those layers, they found two distinct levels, or horizons, with Nubian types of the Levallois technique. Luminescence dating puts these layers between roughly 320,000 and 20,000 years ago.
320,000.
And that older layer, the one dated to over 300,000 years ago, it had specific tool types. Things like large bifacial leaf points, Nubian one cores. These are classic markers for the initial phases of the Middle Stone Age, seen elsewhere in the Eastern Sahara.
So this discovery basically rewrites the timeline for sophisticated tools and likely Homo sapiens in this specific area, pushes it way back.
By a huge margin, yes. It's a major finding.
Okay, let's jump forward quite a bit now. Past huge stretches of time, moving into the Mesolithic, that's roughly the 7th to 6th millennia BCE, so say 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. What was the big news from this era?
One of the really unique discoveries of this whole project was finding a Mesolithic cemetery. It's the only one known so far in the entire Bayuda Desert.
A Mesolithic cemetery. Where was it?
On the slope of a hill called Jebel El Gara, site BP 952.
And what did they find in the cemetery?
They identified at least 16 adult burials. And it looks like the site was used sporadically over quite some time. There were multiple layers of burials.
Suggests it was an important place people kept returning to.
Exactly. Maybe a significant spot, perhaps even sacred in some way.
Did they bury things with the dead? Grave goods?
Yes, simple things but telling. Ostrich eggshell beads, some shells, and a stone pendant. Personal ornaments, basically. Give you a little glimpse into their world.
And wasn't there also a key settlement site from this period?
Yes, very important. Site BP 10V4. They called it the Hunter's Settlement. It's at the foot of another hill, Jebel El Fuel, over in the eastern part of the desert, dated to around 6,000 BCE.
Okay, Hunter's Settlement. What did they find there that earned it that name?
Nearly 300 animal bones, and crucially, they were from wild animals.
Confirms the hunting aspect.
Precisely. Along with those, over 3,400 stone tools and about 2,000 pieces of pottery.
So, clear evidence of hunter-gatherers living deep in the desert 8,000 years ago, using pottery too.
That's the picture. And they radiocarbon dated some of those wild animal bones confirmed.
Yeah.
6th millennium BC.
All right, moving forward again, into later periods, we're talking Neolithic, the Kerma Kingdom, which is a big one in Sudanese history, then the Egyptian New Kingdom influence, Napata, Meroe, and finally the medieval period. This covers roughly from 2500 BCE onwards. What emerged here?
Well, a really significant concentration of sites belong to the Terma culture. That's roughly 2500 to 1500 BCE, sometimes called the Old Kush Horizon.
Okay.
And what this project showed is that Kerma's influence, their actual presence, extended much further into the desert than we previously knew for sure.
Really? So Kerma wasn't just confined to the Nile Valley?
It seems not. I mean, the majority of all the graves they excavated across all time periods, 51 out of 84, are likely associated with the Kerma culture.
51 out of 84? That's a lot.
It is. It suggests a major Kerma presence. They found Kerma cemeteries on hills like Jebel El Gara, again, and a whole complex of them on Jebel Cristal.
Jebel Cristal, Crystal Mountain.
Apparently so. sites like BP 708 and others there. And often, these cemeteries had settlements nearby. Like there was a Neolithic settlement, BP 1346, that had a later phase associated with Kerma cemeteries right next to it.
So communities living and burying their dead out there during the Kerma period, any really standout finds from these Kerma graves?
Oh, yes. One grave at Jebel Kristal's, grave 5 at site BP 941, was incredible. They found an adult male burial.
Okay.
And buried with him as grave offerings, not one, but 2 sheep.
2 whole sheep buried with them. Wow. Just picture that. That tells you something, doesn't it? About status or ritual importance.
It's absolutely remarkable. And another find, fascinating but a bit grim, in the skull of a different buried male individual. They found a bronze arrowhead lodged there.
An arrowhead in the skull.
Yes. And they analyzed the metal. It had a really high arsenic content, over 10%.
Arsenic. Why is that significant?
Well, that specific high arsenic composition.
Yes.
It's unusual. It might be a kind of chemical fingerprint. It could potentially help trace where that bronze came from, where it was smelted, who they were trading with. It's a tantalizing clue.
Intriguing. And did people keep living in the Bayuda after the Kerma period ended?
Yes, the survey definitely documented later occupation too.
Mm-hmm.
Sites from the Meroitic period, which followed Kerma, and then the medieval period. They found settlements like BP 125 from Meroitic, BP 784 for medieval,
Okay.
and also rock art sites like BP 2750. That site also had the remains of a medieval hut. So yeah, people were continuing to use and live in the Bayuda landscape for millennia after Kerma. It wasn't just abandoned.
Now, shifting focus a bit, beyond the artifacts and graves, what about the environment itself? You mentioned it wasn't always desert. What clues did they find about climate change?
This is absolutely crucial for understanding why people were there and how they adapted. They found clear geological evidence of an ancient salt lake, a saline paleolake.
An ancient lake in the desert.
Yes, near a place called Jebel El Muella, which actually means salt mountain in Arabic, interestingly enough.
Okay.
This lake existed back in the early Holocene, thousands of years ago, which points to a much, much wetter climate then.
Wetter, more like savanna.
Seems like it. They found other clues too, like remains of actual savanna animal species, even specific types of beetles preserved in a pot at a Kerma cemetery site, BP 937. And remember those wild animal bones from the Mesolithic site BP 1044? Those also suggest a more resource-rich savanna-like environment was possible.
So the harsh desert we see today, that's a more recent development, environmentally speaking.
It seems so. At certain times in the past, like during the early Holocene and even into the early centuries of the Kerma Kingdom, the Bayuda was likely greener, more capable of supporting different kinds of life.
And that salt lake you mentioned, Jebel El Muelha, Salt Mountain, was it just about water, or was the salt itself important?
This is potentially a huge discovery. That lake wasn't just salty. It was a significant source of natron.
Natron. What exactly is that?
It's a naturally occurring mineral mix, mostly sodium carbonate. And it's actually quite rare geologically. It's incredibly valuable in the ancient world.
Valuable how? What was it used for?
Well, the most famous use, the one everyone knows from Egypt, is mummification. Natron was essential for drying out the bodies.
Right, of course.
But it was also used for making glass, for certain types of ceramics or faience, and even as a cleaning agent.
Okay, so a really useful multi-purpose mineral, and you said it's rare.
Very rare in large, accessible deposits. The most famous ancient source in North Africa is Wadi Natron in Egypt. Finding another potentially major source deep in the Bayuda, that's significant.
So finding this natron source, far from the Nile, potentially far from Egypt, what does that imply? It must change how we think about the Bayuda's role, right?
It absolutely forces us to rethink things, especially ancient communication routes and trade networks.
How so?
Well, if there's a valuable, rare commodity like natron located deep in the desert, there must have been pathways, connections, linking that source area, these volcanic fields where the lake was, back to the Nile Valley, and maybe even further north, toward Egypt itself, where the demand was huge.
So the Bayuda might not have been just a remote hinterland, but potentially a source point on important trade routes driven by this mineral.
That's the strong implication, yes.
Okay.
It adds this whole new economic and strategic dimension to the region's importance in antiquity. It wasn't just out there. It potentially had something crucial that people, even powerful states, wanted.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. After 6 years of intense work, thousands of sites, incredible dating, what's the big picture this project paints of the Bayuda Desert?
It fundamentally rewrites the story. We've gone from seeing it as this vast, largely empty area, maybe occasionally crossed by nomads,
Right.
to understanding it as a landscape with an incredibly deep history of human presence. We're talking over 2.6 million years, from the earliest Old Dewan tools right up to medieval settlements. It shows continuous, or at least recurrent, occupation and adaptation over immense timescales.
And finding all these sites away from the Nile gives us a different viewpoint, doesn't it, compared to just studying the big river valley civilizations?
Precisely. It allows us to actually compare. How did communities living out in the desert interior adapt? What were their strategies for survival for society compared to those living right beside the resources of the Nile?
Different challenges, different opportunities.
Exactly. This project gives us really valuable data on those different socioeconomic strategies, those unique adaptations to a challenging, changing environment.
And it's not just the human story, is it? It's also tracking the environment itself.
Yes, that's a key part. The findings offer this incredible long-term record. Biological changes, environmental shifts, climate fluctuations. Over thousands of years, maybe even longer, we see how the landscape transformed.
From wetter periods to the arid desert.
Right. And crucially, how humans responded, how they adapted, how they persisted or shifted their strategies as the environment changed around them. It's a truly holistic picture. Resilience, adaptation, deep time.
It really is staggering to think about that depth of history, millions of years, packed into a place we previously thought was, well, almost off the map historically. This research, combining the sheer scale of survey with targeted digs and all the modern tech, the 3D models, the dating, it just provides a completely new narrative, doesn't it, for this whole fascinating part of Africa?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it just opens up so many new questions, so many avenues for future research. What else is out there?
Exactly. Which brings us to that final thought for you listening at home to maybe chew on. How might the existence of a vital, rare resource like natron, located deep in the Bayuda, far from the Nile's main artery, have actually shaped ancient connections, maybe trade routes, perhaps even political dynamics between the desert, the Nile Valley, and maybe even Egypt in ways we're only just starting to glimpse?